Welcome to Farm Here Daily, a field forward podcast. I'm your host, David Geiger. Today on Farm Here Daily, property rights, taxes, and animal health are some of the top priorities of the Iowa Cattlemen's Association. We dive into the details of 2026 with Kelli Klink. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, keeping folks informed about what is affecting our farmers. This is Farm Here Daily. And joining us on Farm Here Daily, talking 2026 priorities, is Kelli Klink, Iowa Cattlemen's Association Director of Government Relations and Public Policy. Kelli, thank you so much for joining us again on the program. Appreciate having you here, and let's go over some of those priorities with the folks over there at Cattlemen's. What is kind of the top five, maybe the number one? What's the initial thoughts this year?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a good set of priorities that we're going to charge into session with. There's already a lot of topics that are pretty aligned with what the legislature is going to be looking at. So some of the big ones are going to be private property rights and property taxes. And so we'll be active in those conversations, talking about what's advocating for the producers, what's best for them, longevity of the operations that they have, but then also how it so the sustainability of the industry itself. And so some of those big ones really be focused on opposing eminent domain for private use. That is one of our main charges, as well as reducing landowner impact through land restoration standards. That was a new policy that was brought forth and ratified at our annual meeting. But then also when we talk about property taxes, we'll talk about fair taxes for producers and landowners who have cattle, but then also talking about taxes when it comes to the fruit and forestry tax exemption that's currently in place. We would love to see that modified due to the unfair burden of taxes that it places on other landowners due to that exemption. So we'll be hard at that again. That's been a priority for cattlemen for some time. Additionally, on top of all of that, we'll be focused on animal disease preparedness and prevention. There was about $1 million allocated last session, and so we'll be advocating to ensure that funding remains the same. That way, if the cattle industry were to ever be impacted, we have the resources and the funding to be able to combat that.
Let's start off with the first one you mentioned, eminent domain. Why is that such a huge priority? What are the threats that you folks are seeing, that your members are seeing, that make that such a top priority?
Absolutely. When we talk about cattlemen specifically, a lot of them are landowners themselves or are tenants on other properties. And so private property rights are one of the biggest stances that cattlemen have taken for quite some time. And given the challenges of different projects that have gone on, whether that's utilities related or other underground projects, protecting their property and having the right to say yes or no, you're welcome to come through my land, is really up to the owner of that land. And so that's where the cattlemen's have been charged with setting that strong opposition against the use of eminent domain, given that it should be up to the landowner to make that decision rather than having that use of force through eminent domain.
Is there anything in particular that you're watching for? What was not there that you guys want to be there instead?
Yeah, last session we saw House File 639 was one of the largest debated topics at the session, and that was ultimately vetoed by the governor. Primarily what we were focused on within that, while that bill covered specifically pipeline issues, we do not engage on the pipeline issue itself, but rather the fact of the means of how that project was going to go forth. And so our concerns really are for long-term projects down the road. Of course, when we talk about anything, natural gas, transmission lines, pipelines, etc. And so really that's our stance. Anytime when it talks about a private use, private company coming forth, that's going to be Iowa Cattlemen's stance.
What is the line? Where's the line on terms of eminent domain? Is it private? You mentioned pipelines as something that seems to be maybe company or private related, but they argue it's more societal benefits that exist. Is it just pure, we don't want we feel eminent domain as a whole is not fair and infringes on rights?
Yeah, that's pretty much where our stance lies. We lie within the private Use, understanding that there are some necessary means of eminent domain when it comes to public use, but within reasonable use, of course. And so that's one thing that we've seen. I know even at the national level, we've seen some cases where it's been public use, but it infringes severely on someone's private property. And USDA especially has come in and taken a stance within those local disputes when it comes to different state levels. And so really it's within a reasonable use, but primarily what Iowa Cattlemen's policy states is opposing eminent domain for private use.
Let's move over to property taxes. That was, I believe, the second thing you mentioned. And that is naturally a hotly debated topic among many, many people, not just cattlemen. What about this year in particular makes it more of a priority? Why are you focused on it this year?
Yeah, absolutely. Last session, we saw a huge conversation started on the property tax. We know that the Iowa property tax system has not really been adjusted since about the 70s or 80s. And so, really, the legislature took that charge upon themselves to really look at long term what that can look like for Iowans, and especially. And so, really, where we play within the conversation is ensuring that cattlemen are treated fairly, are taxed fairly, and ensuring that there's no unnecessary burden to come from excessive taxation or an overtaxing different pieces of property or things like that. So really just making sure cattlemen's voices are represented in that conversation.
I believe one of the words you used that stuck out to me in first describing it was unfair. What about it specifically is considered unfair by cattle producers?
Yeah, so largely if it were to come up in the conversation when we talk about anything to be unfair, we really just want to make sure, say it's zoned ag land, we want to make sure that it is taxed properly and that it's not at a higher rate than, say, a similar land, but may not be zoned as such. And so, really, just ensuring that there's that fairness across the board and that our industry, and specifically, say, for cattle barns or pasture land, is not being taxed at an exorbitant rates just because of what it is. And so, just making sure that that level playing field is there.
So, another aspect that I want to just touch on, just because I'm curious. I recall having a meeting with some folks out of country a couple of years back, and they were just extremely amazed at how proximate we had fire stations and schools and grocery stores, etc. And we're just so surprised that some of the roads even out as far distant in rural parts of Iowa. Uh, where is the line of making sure that those are maintained for farmers? Because those folks were farmers as well. They just didn't have access to that in their country. And also making sure that it is fair and things are being kept at a proper standard and farmers specifically aren't being taken advantage of by the local community that wants to potentially tax them more over other means.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's a big conversation too, because the local communities need that funding as well, and that's where a lot of that funding comes from is through property taxes. And so, just making sure that it's balanced and well representative, and not playing a higher tax burden on someone else versus another is really where our focus lies. And so, when we talk about services, I know that's something the legislature as well as the governor is really focused on: is how do we walk that fine line of making sure we're not overtaxing, but we're also fueling those local economies. And so that's kind of where we sit on it, because we typically cattlemen are in those rural areas. And so we want to make sure they're thriving and vibrant as well. And a large part of that is just making sure that that is fairly distributed across the board, but then also ensuring that those cattlemen are able to participate in their local communities and things like that to support it that way as well.
Kelli, also want to touch on the biosecurity side of things, making sure there's disease preventive measures going on across the country. And that one seems more of a national scale effort. Is that something where not just Iowa Cattlemen's, but also the national members and national organizations are also taking a specific eye on in 2026?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this kind of goes for almost all industries when we talk about anything agricultural, is that biosecurity measures, largely for cattlemen, I mean, for other species as well. But ensuring that we are protecting our herds is really what's going to protect the bottom line. And so anything that we can do to keep diseases out, number one, by prevention, but then also if that disease were ever to enter into the United States, ensuring that we are properly prepared to take those measures needed, but then also to re-engage in industry and commerce when it's time.
And when it's time, what are some of the boundaries that want to be kept in terms of making sure a farmer, a rancher, has access to making a living, especially when it touches that difficult subject of disease and potentially depopulation and losing 2 years or more of effort of feeding and raising the livestock? Where is the line on either where farmers are able to receive some sort of compensation or some level of protectiveness for their business that of things they can't control?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's already a lot of programs out there that help with managing risk and those sorts of aspects, especially when it comes to diseases. There's the livestock indemnity program, as well as other indemnification programs that come out a lot of times after a disease outbreak. And those help alleviate some of the burden that comes with losing a herd or losing animals due to weather, drought, disease, what have you. And so a lot of those programs are in place, and we've seen it successfully be done within other species. And so we've kind of taken that model. And then, of course, at the national level, USDA, APHIS, they have multiple plans for a variety of diseases, not just for the cattle industry. So working really closely with those guys, as well as the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, to ensure that all steps are being taken properly, and then allowing for producers to receive those resources.
Because that is a focus, I think of an immediate companion to talking about biosecurity and animal health, and that is the extreme shortage of rural veterinarians that we see across not just Iowa, but the country. Is that also being pursued while actively looking at preventative measures?
100%. And that's something that's happening here in the state, but then also on the national level as well. That's something we've actually come out of, or have seen come out of USDA, is a larger push for veterinarians through either funding their debt or helping assist with that, as well as placing new programs where new veterinarians coming out of school are placed in these rural locations for X amount of years and for scholarships. But really just talking about ways and making those areas attractive is also a big part of the conversation. And so that's really where we've been trying to help support that industry as well, because we rely on those veterinarians, especially in those rural areas. And so, and that's going to be a key piece in any sort of disease outbreak for an animal or domestic. So,
Kelli talked about some pretty big issues of private property rights, making sure we have correct property taxes, as well as health concerns and preventative measures. Anything else for 2026 that Iowa Cattlemen's is really keeping an eye on or watching or pursuing for the year ahead?
yeah, so not only are we going to be focused at the state level for some issues, but also at the national level, particularly looking at interstate weight limits as one, and really looking at ways that we can increase that to efficiently meet hauling for livestock. Not only would that decrease costs across the board, but it would also just make that a little bit more efficient when we talk about transportation. So that's one, but then also the CRP program, really looking at ways to reform that to allow for grazing and allow for cattlemen to take advantage of those programs, because we know cattle are the original conservationists. And so how they can play roles in benefiting those lands as well. And so those are two big pieces that we're going to carry forward into 2026 that we hope to see some movement on.
Kelli Klink is the Director of Government Relations and Public Policy with the Iowa Cattlemen's Association. Kelli, thank you so much for joining us on Farm Your Daily.
Thanks for having me.
This is Farm Your Daily, a Field Forward podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Again, in order to continue to produce this type of local content, we would love to have you join our community. So please follow the podcast as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. You can also find me on social media at Geiger Reports. Again, I am your host, David Geiger, and I'll be back again tomorrow, everybody.